Hello, welcome back. Today something very, very special to me. We talk about David Bowie and we're talking about his Berlin Trilogy. We will go through the 3 albums of the trilogy. I will share how it has been, especially when it comes to one song, how it has been when you have been in the in the center of it in a way. It was quite something at that time. And of course we do a short comparison between the original first British pressings I have here and the reissue recordings they did a couple of years ago of those records. Yeah, you know, the Berlin Trilogy is Berlin mostly in the spirit of things. As only, and we will get into this song, as only Heroes is a pure product of the city, a pure product of Berlin. You know, Bowie came to Berlin to flat his self-dissolving drug addictions, and the man who convinced him to come to Germany, to Berlin, was Iggy Pop, who also was here at that time for the same reasons. And so the Thin White Duke came to Berlin, he lived there and produced those albums. Although, as I said, for example, Lodger is a product, he did it in Switzerland and to my knowledge in New York, or was it LA? I think it was New York. Yeah, but it's called the Berlin Trilogy. In a way it makes sense. And let's start with 2 albums, 2 of the trilogy. Let's start with the iconic, unbelievable, important and beautiful Low, and of course Heroes. Those are the original first British pressing. Here is the inlay of Low. Here we have the original inlay of Heroes. Here is the vinyl. I show you Low, and I'm extremely pleased that Dave got me these really cool, great sounding copies of those. Yeah, Heroes is on the same label, the same RCA label. So, as I said, when they produced those 2 albums, the Low and Hero album, it was heavily influenced by this new German music, this krautrock. Iggy Pop had, I think at the beginning he lived in Cologne, and he had managed to get heavily connected with the guys from Kraftwerk, from Neu. Eno did a lot of stuff with Cluster, and of course these things shaped those records, and in my opinion these krautrock groups shaped it heavily, and later on David Bowie really admitted it, and which is of course not a shame. I mean, he lived here, and why not? I mean, this was top-notch music at the time, and being influenced by that when you hear it is almost natural. You know, when we talk about the Berlin Trilogy, because when he came here to Germany, to Berlin, he had not enough material to start and go to the studio. First, he produced the first Iggy Pop album, The Idiot. And during that production, he developed the technique of doing those 3 albums for the Berlin Trilogy, starting of course with Low, and then Heroes came. And then on Heroes was the title track, Heroes. And now we have to talk a bit about Berlin at that time. So that I really want to share the impact, the importance, the meaning this song has to a lot of my people in my generation, at least here in Germany. You know, Berlin was the divided city in a divided country. Berlin, highest suicide rate in the world at that time, but that doesn't mean it was an incredible depressive city. It wasn't. You know, imagine, I had the luck that my best friend at that time, he lived in Berlin. And so I have been there 2-3 times a year for at least 2 to 3 weeks. And Berlin had a heavy nightlife, was a very young city, because every man who doesn't want to go to the military went over to Berlin, because if you live in Berlin, you don't have to go to the military. The whole city was smaller than you might think. It's a big city, but it was a divided city, and the war was everywhere. The war was every day. You know, you had this checkpoint Charlie, where you go there, and you was face to face with the enemy in a way. It was 20 meters, 50 meters, and it felt even closer. Everywhere, military helicopters, whole day, whole night. Brandenburger Tor, not like today where you can walk through, where you can drive through. It was an empty space surrounded by this wall. Very, 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 very strange times, but not, as you might think, so depressive. Although the black leather jacket was something you really needed at that time. And then the nightlife. The nightlife was 24/7. It was a huge part of the youth culture there. So many clubs and so much young people, 70% men, which doesn't make it easier, but that's how it was. And then Bowie came with Heroes. I was in Berlin at that time, and the impact was unbelievable, because this giant of a musician lives in the city, puts out this song even with some lines in German. And this song was so Berlin at that time. Although, as I said, heavily influenced by Neu, but still nobody cared in a way, because this was something special. It lifted up the whole idea of being in Berlin and being young at that time, and so who cares for the helicopters, who cares that the whole city needs to be supported by air. It was just great, and gave the city, the young part of the city, an real uplifting feeling. And I will never forget that, because sometimes it was not that easy, and the music really helped at that time. Yeah, that's why for a lot of people in my generation, I can imagine that this album, this Berlin Trilogy, and especially Heroes, is quite something special. Yeah, and then let's briefly get into the third part, which in my opinion, in a way, the third part is The Idiot by Iggy Pop. But they wanted to help the sales, so they said Lodger, third part of the Berlin Trilogy. And yeah, as I said, it was produced in Switzerland and New York. And yeah, it's in a way, it's the most diverse album of this trilogy. It's heavily influenced and shows his upcoming interest in world music and mainstream pop music. Also an incredible, great album. For me, this Berlin Trilogy are amongst his highlights in an unbelievable career over 5 decades, 6. I'm sure it's at least is 5 decades, which is so impressive. Such an important, great artist. But the Berlin Trilogy is a standout part for me, and I think also for music history, because Low was extremely influential in many ways for the development of modern pop music. And why nobody talks about The Idiot when it comes to the Berlin Trilogy is not so clear to me, because this is an integral part of it and was the way to get to these achievements. Yeah, now to the comparison against the remaster reissues. They really do hold up very, very good. Very good. I prefer the freshness of the originals. I prefer the hotter cut of the originals and the more impressive and prominent punch. But if you have the remaster reissues, sound-wise, you are fine. There is not much pressure to say, oh, I need those originals. Although, of course, consider that, of course, the original always be the icon, always will be the artifact, and they do sound slightly better overall. But it's not that I would say it kills it. No, that would be very unfair to say. They did a decent job on those, and this now depends on your own, let's say, preferences, where to go. Those originals, especially Lodger, aren't that expensive. The most expensive one, to my knowledge, is the Low, and I can imagine that for the time being, those are affordable. But of course, someday this might, and I'm quite sure this will change. Yeah, so much for this Berlin Trilogy by David Bowie. Very interesting, important part of my life, and still almost on a heavy rotation. Almost, but only almost. Okay. Thank you very much for your time, and see you on the next one. Bye.